I want to begin number 5 by actually having you refer back to the problem I just did, which was number 4. And remember, I gave you a demand equation, and we found out the revenue based on price. That's really the one I want you to pay attention to, because there's the equation that we used. In this problem, I've given you the equation for the cost based on the quantity that you produce. And from this, I want you to find at what price you will maximize the profit. And of course, to find profit, I am going to take the difference between the revenue and the cost. And of course, the difference between those two will be my profit. So first of all, you'll notice that my cost equation in this case, the cost given the quantity Q is 2 times Q plus 5,000. And again, this gives me the total cost of producing Q items. Now, I will need you to remember back here, we calculated from that demand equation, we actually came up with this version of the same demand equation, solve for Q. So this is what I know. I know based on a price of P, if I plug this in, I can determine the quantity that I will be able to produce at that price and sell, of course. Now, coming back to my original equation again, remember it was 2 times Q plus 5,000. By substituting this equation where I knew Q equaled 4,500 minus 100p, and remember we determined this from problem 4. By substituting that into my equation, I have 2 times Q plus 5,000. Simply multiplying through the parentheses and combining my like terms gives me a cost equation. So cost based on price now instead of quantity would be negative 200p plus 14,000. Remember again that when I want to determine the profit based on a price, I merely take the revenue equation at that price and subtract the cost function at that price. And when I take my revenue that I took in and I subtract the cost that I incurred in making those products, then I have my product, or my profit, excuse me. So again, remember what the revenue equation was? I just referred you back to it a little while ago. This was from problem 4. Hopefully you were taking notes. There is my revenue equation minus the cost equation that I just determined, remember up here. When I take the difference between those two, I'll have my profit. So in this case, I'll take the negative through the parentheses, which will change my signs. My negative 200p becomes positive 200. My positive 14,000 becomes negative 14,000. I will go ahead and put this in descending order and combine my two like terms, 4,500p plus 200p, leaves me with 4,700p. And I now have a profit equation based on my price of P. Again, I want to maximize the profit. So I'm going to take the first derivative. Again, this is a simple power rule in both cases. Moving the 2 times the negative 100 gives me 200, and subtracting 1 leaves me with 1. And again, the derivative of 4,700p is simply 4,700. Now again, I want to maximize it, so what I'm going to do is set this equal to 0, and then I want to solve for p, which I will do by adding 200p to both sides. 0 plus 200p is 200p. On the right side, these terms cancel, and I'm left with my 4,700. Finally, I will divide both sides of my equation by 200. And that gives me a critical point of $23.50, which I again am going to assume really is the maximum. Again, if I had more time, and we're going to basically pretend I'm taking a test, and I will guarantee you on the test that when I ask you to maximize it, that the point you find is indeed a maximum. But to be really rigorous, you should use a first or second derivative test to ensure that that is a maximum. Now let's find out how much our actual profit would be. So, I'm going to plug my 2350 into my original profit equation that you'll recall I had back here at this step. So I have negative 100 times my profit, or my price, excuse me, of $23.50 squared, plus 4,700 times my price of $23.50 minus 14,000. You crank that into your calculator and you will find a price, or excuse me, a profit of $41,225. Now, let me show you one other way I could have approached this answer once I knew indeed where the maximum would be. Again, recall that if you want the profit, the maximum profit, you merely have to take the revenue and subtract the cost. So, since I knew my revenue was $4,500 times my price minus 100 times the price squared, and again, just to make sure you recall that equation, let me point you back one more time. Again, I just plugged $23.50 into this original equation I found on problem 4. I took my $4,500 times that $23.50 price minus 100 times that $23.50 squared, and that again results in a profit of $50,525. Now you'll notice, because I did change the price for by $1, it definitely changed my revenue from problem 4. In fact, this one is $100 less than what it was on the last problem. So now let's figure out the cost. The cost equation, which we had here just a moment ago, you'll recall was negative 200 times the price plus 14,000. Plugging in $23.50 then, I have negative 200 times that $23.50 plus my $14,000, which means my cost was $9,300. So if I take my profit, or my revenue of $50,525 and subtract from that my cost of $9,300, once again I find the same result, which is $41,225. Now if you do have time on your test, I do recommend doing the problem a second or a different way to ensure that you really do have the right answer. Merely checking the problem the same way that you did the first time may mean that you just recreate the same mistake that you made the first time. If there's a complete second different way to do the problem, that's always advisable.